Just like the Dark Souls games, Bloodborne has this aesthetic that has always mesmerized me. I love the dark gothic setting, along with all the mysteries that surround its story. Another thing that made me want to really dive into the game was its Lovecraftian elements and Berserk inspiration. Cosmic horror is an amazing subgenre, and Berserk is one of my favorite manga ever, so all of that combined in Bloodborne felt like a dream come true. The only thing that stopped me from playing the game for so long was its difficulty, which is the same reason why I never got into the Souls games. It took a few years, but when I finally gave Bloodborne a chance, I was completely blown away. Bloodborne is a 2015 game developed by From Software. The game begins with your character arriving at Yharnam and meeting a mysterious man. You'll need to create your hunter here, so you can select their gender, age, and origin, which determines your basic stats. There's a lot to customize, so if you're the type who loves being able to tinker with your character's features, then you might spend a bit of time here. I was actually surprised with how deep the customization was. I mean, most of the hats and helmets in the game end up covering your face, but I think that a game having complex character customization is always a plus. After you finish creating your hunter, you receive a blood transfusion, and just like that, you wake up and gain control of your character. Bloodborne is a game that spares you from details, so you get dropped into the game almost immediately, so it's up to you to discover what is happening in the story and the world. If you're familiar with From Software games, then you know there is no mercy here. The enemies in the game are tough. They're fast and aggressive, so you might end up completely destroyed in a few seconds. Because of its nature, I think Bloodborne is the type of game that might push new players to quit during the first few hours. But if you persevere, the rest of the game is like a series of obstacles that you need to overcome. In my experience, Bloodborne had a snowball effect the farther I got in the game. Like, there would be times where I start wondering if I could really finish it, whether I got stuck in one area or boss battle. But every time I beat a section that I previously thought was impossible, my confidence grew, which led me to keep playing even though the game got harder and harder. But of course, there were a few other factors that kept me hooked in the game. Like, Bloodborne feels like a never-ending nightmare, but in the best possible way, if that makes sense. Yharnam is such a beautiful city. Yes, it's filled with corpses, graves, and horrifying creatures, but Bloodborne just has this amazing art direction that makes its haunting locations look absolutely gorgeous. Each corner in the city is packed with so much attention and detail. It still looks amazing even as I played it years after the game's initial release. Many games have some sort of map and quest tracker, but Bloodborne forces you to observe your surroundings. Thanks to its level design, there are a lot of landmarks from enemies to buildings and objects. They're all carefully placed, so it made it so much easier to remember paths to each area. Aside from being pretty and helping you not get lost, Bloodborne's different environments hold a lot of mysteries. Bits and pieces of lore are all around Yharnam, and that includes items since they give out story hints. Everything is subtle in Bloodborne. Even the few cutscenes that the game has show and say very little. Now in combat, a bit of your stamina is used every time you run or attack. It takes a few seconds to recover, so you can't just hack and slash all you want. You can always regain your lost health by quickly damaging enemies as soon as you're hit, but it can be quite dangerous. Whenever I got impatient, I would rush towards enemies when I lost health, hoping I could get some back. But I ended up dying or losing even more health, which costed me more blood vials. You can heal any time using those potion-like items, but you can only carry a limited amount. If you run out, you end up having to farm them from enemies or buy more to stock up on. It gets easier later in the game, but it's quite a hassle when you're just starting out. Combat in Bloodborne is easy to understand but challenging to master. Your starting trick weapon has two forms that it can transform into. The first one has short reach, but it lets you attack rapidly. The second one extends your weapon, letting you deal slow, heavy blows with greater reach. You can even do combos by transforming your weapon in between attacks, and holding a heavy attack that lets you charge it into a powerful blow. You can also carry a secondary weapon, like the firearm that you start with, but it doesn't have much damage to it, so it's mainly used to parry enemies. bullets are limited like blood vials, so you'll need to restock unless you find drops from enemies. But yeah, apart from your starting equipment, there are a decent number of weapons to choose from, and you'll discover them as you play the game. The threaded cane and the tonitrus were my go-to weapons for most of my playthrough. I loved how I could poke enemies with the cane, and if I wanted some distance, I could switch it into a whip and start slashing away. It also made my hunter look classy, which was also important. Now the tonitrus was especially useful to me when I needed that bolt damage. The only downside to it is it had low durability compared to other weapons, so I had to repair it more often. The good thing about Bloodborne is you can upgrade your weapons, so you never have to worry about out-leveling them. You'll get to upgrade weapons with blood shards and apply blood gems that'll add various effects. All of those items can be found when you defeat enemies and explore Yharnam. As for runes, they basically give different buffs and bonuses to your character, like boosting your maximum stamina or increasing your resistance to certain elements. Now to level up and buy items, you'll need blood echoes. You can get them by killing enemies or consuming cold blood items that are found around the game. But if you die, you lose everything, at least until you grab them again by going back to the last place where you died. As for insight, it's kinda like another currency used to buy certain items. It's also used by bells, which I will talk more about later. If you start holding lots of insight, a few interesting things happen. I think they're better left as surprises. So yeah, the gameplay is really deep here. Because of all the weapons and customization options, you can experiment with different playstyles. There are a lot of armor sets too, which of course have different stats, but more importantly, they look awesome. I remember trying out different armor whenever I was struggling with certain bosses, but outside of fights, I just ran around in whatever outfit I liked. Wearing a cool coat definitely wasn't improving my skills, but I felt powerful, so nothing else mattered. Other than clothes, the enemies look awesome in the game. I think I was busy admiring how most of them looked, even when I was dying, and I'll never forget how uneasy I felt when I first encountered the more bizarre ones in the game. There's so much enemy variety, from werewolves, creepy cult followers, and huge boss-like enemies, and I don't think I've ever obsessed about bosses in any video game until I played Bloodborne. They look absolutely stunning, and the music makes their fights even better. Bloodborne relies on sound effects and ambience, so hearing orchestrated music in boss fights really makes you feel the weight of it. It also made bosses both epic and terrifying. Like, I'll never forget the first time I encountered the cleric beast, and it's all because of the music and his horrifying screeching. Another thing that I'll always remember about this game is the feeling of defeating a boss after dying over and over again. I think I've gone through a huge range of emotions whenever I beat a boss, from rage, euphoria, to being calm and composed. Part of the fun and frustration of Bloodborne is trying different strategies until you find something that works. I remember being awful when I started the game. I kept using blood vials like it was nothing instead of saving it up, and I rarely locked onto enemies. I did this up until I fought my third boss, Blood-Starved Beast. It completely destroyed me in a few seconds, so that was the fight that made me stop and think about what I was doing wrong. I learned how to sidestep, parry, and do other moves, all while using items that I thought would help me win. It took a lot of trial and error. Even when I had a good strategy, one wrong move had me dying all over again. I went back and forth from fighting solo to summoning an NPC to help. I tried to summon another player before that, but nobody came. The strangest part is that I defeated the boss when I did so many things wrong. Half of the Molotovs I threw didn't even hit the beast, and I never noticed that I kept throwing oil after that because I was too busy panicking. Despite doing all that, I managed to beat it. The fight was silly, yeah, but I felt great. This is just one of the many stories that I have about my playthrough, and I'm sure everyone who has played Bloodborne has their own unique experiences to share. So going back to the review, you can call other players into your world by using a small resonant bell. They'll be able to help you through the game, like when you're stuck on a boss. Personally, I didn't meet anyone throughout my playthrough, at least someone who wasn't hostile. I don't know if it was an issue with my connection or if it's because the game is a couple of years old, but it was fine. Really. You can also invade other players' worlds, but again, I never did that because I could barely defend myself from invading players. But I did make use of the NPC Cooperators. They were helpful sometimes, but for other bosses, they made the fight way harder because they would die in the middle of it, leaving me with a boss that has a much higher health pool than usual. But I'm glad that NPC Cooperators were an option for boss battles. They didn't do much damage, but they were perfect as decoys. Even though I rarely encountered other players, I never felt alone in the game. Phantoms of other online people in the same area were visible from time to time, and the notes left by other players were especially useful. Using the notebook, you can leave messages behind for everyone to read, and it can be rated as either fine or foul. You can't freely write down anything though. You have to combine phrases and words from the notebook's template. I was actually amazed at how creative people got when they wrote down messages, and almost all of the notes I encountered were incredibly helpful. I found so many items, shortcuts, and hidden paths because of other players, and they gave some great tips for bosses too. It didn't take long for me to start leaving my own messages too, hoping that I could help someone out there. One thing that surprised me about leaving notes is that if one person marks it as fine while you're online, you'll get fully healed. It was a nice little boost whenever I was in combat. Outside of actual players, there are a few NPCs in Bloodborne. You can either meet them in person or talk to them in front of doors and windows. Some give out side quests, while others only say a few lines of dialogue. The thing is, they usually talk in riddles and hints. Like, some of the things they say are as cryptic as everything else in the game. Oh, and they're kinda weird. Most NPCs have this eerie aura, at least when you first meet them. It doesn't help that their voice acting is so peculiar. They sounded like they were up to something. The voice acting in Bloodborne is great, by the way. The game has far less voice lines compared to other big titles, but the voice actors deliver them very well. The final thing that I want to talk about in the main game is the Chalice dungeons. They're basically optional dungeons with multiple levels that have enemies and bosses to defeat. I played through this part of the game for a few hours, but I honestly didn't like it. Some Chalice dungeons are procedurally generated, while others are the same for everyone. The problem is, the level design got way too stale for me. Many rooms looked the same, and unlike the main game, there was no big mystery or anything that was driving me to play through them. The only thing that I liked about them were the unique bosses that weren't found in the main game. It's a shame that they're hidden in between recycled enemies and environments. The dungeons are very rewarding though, so if you don't mind its repetitive nature, they provide a good challenge and lots of rewards for players who want more from the game. Right before I finished my Bloodborne playthrough, I went for the Old Hunters DLC. The DLC takes place in Hunter's Nightmare, which looks kinda like a distorted version of areas in the base game. I couldn't help but be doubtful about the DLC's quality because I wasn't expecting that the Cathedral Ward would be reused, but the game proved me wrong as soon as I got past that section. There were new places to explore, bosses to die to, and weapons and armor to find. I especially loved the new areas because they held so many mysteries that added to the main game. Like the research hall was one of the places that caught my interest. It was a painful area to play through, yeah, but I was so fascinated by the place that I didn't mind dying over and over again. I had so many questions running through my mind every time I entered a new room, but I suppose that's just a normal reaction to everything in the game. Now, the boss fights were insane in this DLC. I found some of them to be much harder than the bosses in the main game. The final one in particular took the most time and energy for me to defeat. But all of the bosses were great overall. They had the same level of quality as the main game's bosses. So yeah, I think it's obvious that I think Bloodborne is amazing and I fell in love with the game. I don't know exactly how long I took to finish the game, but I'd say around 50 hours, while playing through the Old Hunters took me 10. Only two things bothered me about the game throughout my playthrough: the loading times and the fast travel system. You can't just teleport to any location, so you have to go back to the main hub, Hunter's Dream, and choose where you want to go. The loading screens in this game are kinda long too, so I've gotten impatient whenever I had to do this, but I consider it a small problem because of how good the rest of the game is. Bloodborne has a lot of depth, so it's a game that's definitely meant to be played multiple times. There's just so many things to miss out on in one playthrough, and playing the game again gives you the opportunity to try out different playstyles, or simply go through the game again using the knowledge that you already have, with added difficulty of course if you decide to do New Game Plus. But as much as I love the game, I'm not willing to go through all the pain and suffering again. At least, not yet. Besides, I still need to go through the Souls games and check out Elden Ring once that's out. Bloodborne's only available on the PS4 as of this video's release, but who knows what the future has in store for the game. It would be awesome if the game got a PC release. Even more people can get to enjoy it. Let me know what you thought about the video. It was really hard not to bring up spoilers when talking about Bloodborne, but I'm sure everyone here who has played the game also loves the cosmic horror stuff. But yeah, I absolutely love this game. I think enough time has passed since I first wrote this script. I keep getting the urge to play the game again. Maybe I'll slowly replay it whenever I'm free. The game gave out way too many weapons towards the end that it would be a waste if I didn't try them out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.